Yeah, so I mean, yesterday Sakib gave a great overview of the development of endoscopic spine surgery at the whole world. And, a lot of our stuff is gonna overlap because, as he said, endoscopic spine surgery developed in the United States, right? That started as the seed, as the idea. So there's a lot of overlap here, but hopefully I'm gonna share some stories. It's kind of like the Alexander Hamilton play. It's like, you want to be in the room where it happens. So I feel like I had like a front row view of, seeing it develop with Anthony Yeung and some of the other leaders and pioneers. Okay, this is not advancing. Turn the power switch on. All right, there we go. All right, so obviously the history of spinal endoscopy started with Parvis Cambin. He described the Cambin's triangle. We've kind of gone over that. This is just sort of an overview and review of the timeline. In the 70s, he placed a Craig needle in the disc. Forsten Hausman then showed the first report of a modified scope into the disc, some literature. Cambin then introduced a working cannula into the disc and started publishing some pictures of the disc. So showed the anatomy to the rest of the world, described the anatomy, described the boundaries, Cambin's triangle. This was all talked about yesterday. He started doing courses in the US, and that's where my dad jumped into the story in the history of the United States, endoscopic spine surgery. Kind of took it to the next level, developed the first commercially available working channel scope, and him, along with other leaders like Thomas Hoogland, who started doing endoscopic surgery from the outside in approach, and Dad started in the disc and going out, and that's kind of history. Is like Cambin started in the disc and was more intradiscal, and then kind of taught you don't want to go in that epidural space. You don't want to cause scarring. You don't want to be minimally invasive. And then, most of the pathology is not in the disc, right? And so then Dad started inside out. Start in the disc, then follow it out, but the disc can be your home. And then Dr. Hoogland had the different perspective. Pathology's on the outside. So start on the outside and then follow it in if you need to. They argued a lot. A lot of people were talking about stuff, but I think in the late 2000, teens, that's when some of the academics in the U.S. started getting it, with Mike Wang and Christoph, teaching. Sanjay Kanalkonda is the first fellow. I mean, Sakib Hassan, as the kind of first endoscopic fellow, and and then more recently, and this is all kind of modern day now. Biportal has come to the United States with endoscopic, with Don Park promoting it from the Korean surgeons who kind of promoted it, and now current day, it's a whole platform technology. We can do a lot of stuff with the endoscope, not just contained disc herniations, foraminal disc herniations. You can do cervical, thoracic, biportal. You can use it for fusion. So, the future, it's up to you guys, to create a legacy, and this is just going to keep expanding. So just want to go back and kind of look at some of the history. Anthony Yeung, and just kind of tell his perspective and story. He was motivated to get into minimally invasive, less disruptive surgery, motivated by his mother's experience. His mother had an open laminectomy, unfortunately had some post-laminectomy instability, and he vowed to find a better way, and we always say endoscopic or minimally invasive spine surgery, you're trying to just minimize the damage to the innocent bystanders, the multifidus, the ligaments, all that stuff, and to do the same thing, right? And so he took Cambin's course, it resonated with him, and he took that idea and ran with it. And one of the stories in terms of developing his first system, he had the idea of using a modified hysteroscope. So before the Yeung endoscopic spine system was developed, he was using a lengthened hysteroscopy scope, urology scope. And when he had the idea to get this commercially produced, it was at one of these meetings where he went to, I think it was like Surgical Dynamics or something, and had the idea. It was waiting patiently or maybe impatiently to talk to one of the executives. And then, one of the executives' buddies came up and started talking, and so he was waiting. So he just went over to the next booth, which was Richard Wolf. They had a whole bunch of scopes, and he pitched the idea, and the rest is history. They ran with it and created the first working endoscope, and so that's how it went to Richard Wolf versus one of the other earlier spinal kind of scope systems. Oh, was it? Well, maybe it was Stores too. Okay, and so in 1997, it was the first working channel scope system. Eventually, and that had a 2.7 millimeter working channel, so there was a little limitations on the pathology you could treat. I think not until the second and third generation endoscopes, which had larger working channel diameters, where you could use burrs and keratins and do bony work, that really expanded the indications for the surgery, and it made it make sense. And a bunch of companies. So Wolf started that. Dr. Rutan kind of joined the team for Richard Wolf, and they collaborated and made bigger endoscopes. Dr. Rutan helped bring the concept of full endoscopic spine surgery, where you could do interlaminar, you could do a lot more bony work. And then in 2001, Joymax with Tom Hooglin, they joined the party, so to speak, and did their endoscopic system with the outside-in technique, doing foraminal reaming. And then Eloquence, this is kind of a good story, and hopefully I'll get some good stories here that people didn't know, but Alan Ellman started Ellman Medical, and he was actually met my dad as a potential patient. He had a laminectomy, he had continued pain. He had this company that had bipolar radiofrequency tools for plastic surgeries, ENT. They're not in spine. There was no hemostatic probe for the spine scopes. And Dad didn't end up operating on him, but he's like, hey, I could use your technology in spine. And so they developed like the radiofrequency bipolar probe. And then eventually, in the beginning, Ellman made these for Richard Wolf and for Joymax, and then eventually Ellman sold that to a bigger company, and he had kept the spine applications just for him, and then he formed Eloquence, Ellman and radiofrequency, so Eloquence. And so they formed the company to do these radiofrequency probes, and they still made them OEM for Richard Wolf and Joymax. Then, eventually, that was sort of the kind of the profitable part of the business, right, the disposables. And so Richard Wolf, Joymax, they started making their own probes that plugged into the Ellman box, or the Eloquence box. And then that's when Eloquence, and I remember Alan asked Dad, he's like, hey, I promised I'd never make a spine system to compete with the Yes system, but we need to survive and we need to do a spine system. And so he said, yes, you should do that. And so then now Eloquence is a full service spine company with their scope and everything. So that's just a little background history. Maxmore came out in 2014, and that was Thomas Hooglin sort of working with his son and creating their own company. And then, as we know, in 2023, Arthrex was the first major player, not niche player, to start coming into the endoscopic spine surgery realm. So, you can look at the generations of endoscopes, and this actually is just bigger scopes. So you can use bigger, more traditional instruments, more so like the burr and the keratins. And this allowed you to do different pathologies. Go for extruded migrated herniations and cervical and thoracic giant calcified herniations, because you can use the burr and do bony work. It also facilitated interlaminar work where you can do the hemilaminotomy, whereas the smaller working channel endoscopes, you couldn't, you had limited tools. Your other tools other than just the mechanical tools were like the laser and the radiofrequency probe. And not everybody has a laser. It's a very niche product, and it's also somewhat expensive. And at that time, people are like, "Oh, you're using a laser. What do you do? Like, Luke Skywalker or something, what is that? Is that just a gimmick, or, it's actually a really nice dissecting tool. So, Anthony Yeung, he was certainly a pioneer. All these guys coming up here, grew up with endoscopic spine surgery, being on part of the podiums and stuff, but it was a totally new concept, and this was in the 90s. And just, you guys have seen like some of the beautiful videos everyone's shown here and everything, seeing the visualization, the nerve roots, everything, the anatomy. Can you imagine going back to the 90s or 2000? They didn't even have email then, PowerPoint, I just looked up. PowerPoint was invented in 1990, and for the first few years, it was really just made to organize transparency slides and stuff and handouts. And so, let alone having video and presentations. So can you imagine presenting to people, and, it's an infancy of PowerPoint and, pictures. And I remember my father actually projecting pictures on our big TV and having his tripod and camera to, take pictures of blurry pictures and then send them out for slides and stuff. So, it was an uphill battle to kind of show everyone what he was doing. And unfortunately, this is part of the history. Early on in the days, it created skepticism. People, the academics, they weren't teaching it. He's just this Chinese guy in private practice doing this weird stuff. What do you mean endoscope in the spine? And it actually spawned the first and only lawsuit he ever lost. And this was a patient that had a stable spondylolisthesis, back pain and leg pain, radicular pain, foraminal stenosis and stuff. And he actually enrolled him in an FDA study. An FDA study evaluating the efficacy of an Ortec thermal probe, monopolar probe, for hemostasis and tissue coagulation. So he signed him up for that to decompress the nerve and the foramen, help alleviate the radiculopathy, and maybe help his back pain with the thermal treatment, because this was at the time IDET was going on. So this was more of a visualized treatment. And, he did the surgery. Patient didn't get better, had a little bit of a dysesthesia and even a little moderate neurodeficit, 3 out of 5, foot drop and stuff. And then he saw, of course, someone next door, at one of the big institutions, Dr. Dickman, who then, basically said, hey, it was totally unindicated to do any foraminal decompression, thermal annuloplasty. It has 0 chance of helping because you have a spondylolisthesis. It's instability. You have to fuse. It had 0 chance, so it was below standard of care. So he did 3-level decompression fusion, and guess what? Patient didn't get any better. He actually worsened his foot drop, but blamed it all on the index procedure. Burned the nerve, whatever, injured the nerve. Became an expert witness for this patient, and ultimately this was the first and only lawsuit that my dad had lost. He even went further and filed a board complaint. Case was dismissed, and then my father had to go after him for defamation and stuff. And unfortunately, everything was considered to be qualified immunity, within the scope of the complaints and the lawsuit. But I think Dickman even maybe questioned himself about whether, what Yeung was doing, because he sent out a questionnaire to like 30 colleagues asking, what they thought of the type of case indications. And, unfortunately, we couldn't get any of the emails because he deleted them because he said he promised them anonymity. And then, of course, when the lawyer said, okay, well, guess the hard drive and stuff, oh, guess what? He destroyed the hard drive. So not available. It kind of sounds familiar to the present day. But that's just sort of a part of the history, an unfortunate part of the history, and just the kind of effects of being a pioneer. And so I think we can all be lucky that there are pioneers who have ideas and develop them, and eventually can modify them and make them applicable to the masses, and obviously, eventually now there's all these studies showing, limited decompressions, even in the face of a spondylolisthesis that's stable, are very applicable and valid procedures. So There's a lot of other pioneers. This kind of goes in the rest of the world, like Tom Hooglin, Martin Knight, who did a lot of laser foraminoplasty, Rutan for the full endoscopic stuff. The Koreans, Dr. Sang-ho Lee and Gun Choi, building their hospitals and really contributing a huge part to the literature. And Dad's first fellows, in China and in India, Zifeng Zhang and Satish Gore here. So, just going back to Dad, in history, first Richard Wolff, Yes Workshop, it was cool on his computer, had a copy of the first program right there, 1997 in Germany. Dad contributed trying to get this academic working with IITS, which is Intradiscal Society founded mainly with chymopapane, but then expanded to include endoscopic, intradiscal type procedures. He became the president. He's currently the executive director, but they're not really putting on anything. He also formed with John Chu and Martin Savitz, the American Academy of Minimally Invasive Spinal Medicine and Surgery. That's a mouthful. They actually had 2 books in 2000 and 2005, and then also started a journal in 2006. But it was hard. It was an uphill battle. Not the mainstream academic guys. He even formed like these World Congress of Minimally Invasive Spine Surgery and Techniques with the Korean doctors through IITS and through the COMIS, and had the first kind of World Congress in Hawaii, then in Vegas, and it's still continued on every few years, still going on. It's a good collaboration. And one of our other kind of trainees and mentored Chol Kim. So Steve Garfin at UCSD, wanted to bring endoscopic surgery to UCSD and the academics, and Chol came out and spent some time with us, and so he was kind of like the first academic guy Dad was training, and then he had the idea, let's start an organization dedicated to endoscopic spine surgery. And I'm like, Chol, we got that. We have IITS, AAMIS, and so, but he was undeterred, and he formed ESMIS to focus on endoscopic surgery and minimally invasive surgery, and we were part of that initial meeting and decision-making in 2006 and 2007, and then it finally launched for the full-fledged meeting in 2008. Dad and I were one of the couple of the founding members, along with a bunch of other people, and I know a lot of people knew that Chol started that. And then so, I kind of entered the story of history, I guess, in 2002. I had the privilege to join my father in practice, and like I said, I was born with the endoscope in my hand, right? He was always chasing me, and through college and med school, I always had to go observe him, when I come home. But it was really lucky because I did my first case in residency, teaching my attending how to do it, because I'd been in a bunch of cases, and just when I joined him in 2002, he was always there to help me through the learning curve, and it was a very lucky and unique experience. And then so he eventually retired in 2019, but he's still looking over my shoulders and giving me advice, solicited and unsolicited. And so, now we have, Desert Institute for Spine Care, and this is kind of his legacy. I have 4 partners. We all were trained by Dr. Anthony Yeung and do different parts of the endoscopic spine surgery, some more than others. And, of course, Dad has been committed to education. He's trained hundreds of surgeons, and this talk's focused on kind of the U.S. surgeon. I'm just kind of highlighting some of the guys that are prominent in terms of teaching in this field. Chol Kim, Jim Yu, they were kind of the first kind of academic guys, but sort of soon after they learned this, they all went into private practice, so don't have like the huge tree. And our first fellows were Victor Hayes and Farhan Siddiqui, who are now in like the Tampa area. They finished their fellowship in Johns Hopkins and then did another 3-month like fellowship with us. So they were kind of like our first fellows. And then, Dan Lake, Ray Gardaki, Saurabh Golgi. Ray was also a contemporary of mine too, because he was in the same we did the same fellowship. I basically handed my pager to Ray to start his fellowship. And so, yeah, he's been kind of following along and picked it up, and credits Anthony Yeung on how he does all his injections and started Inside Out and now doing the modern day. And Saurabh, he's funny because he spent some weeks with us, and he goes, yeah. And I even stayed at as he says, your dad's shitty rental. And spent some time, but it was just to help to defer costs and stuff. And so, Dad's definitely dedicated to the promotion of endoscopic spine surgery. He put his money where his mouth is, donated some money to get dedicated the first academic endoscopic spine center at the University of New Mexico's Anthony T. and Eileen K. Yeung Endoscopic Spine Center. The idea was to train the surgeons there. None of them did any endoscopic surgery, so sort of uphill battle. So even though it's that center and trying to teach them, it's a slower process and turnover and stuff. But they're doing some of the endoscopic spine surgery and teaching some residents and fellows. But it wasn't until like I said in the timeline with Mike Wang and Christoph that it really took off. So some of the early debates, inside out, outside in. Dad started, expanding from Camden, like I said, starting in the disc, getting that saddle view where you can see the epidural space, the annulus, the intradiscal space, and then work your way out and then confirm the decompressed nerve. Versus, outside in, which, Dr. Hoogland started with JoyMax. And, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but it was really first a fluoroscopically guided placement of reamers and rods in the epidural space. And you can see, he said you want to get posterior to the vertebral body and in the midline, blindly, with fluoroscopically guided tools, and ream blindly, and then put your scope in there. So that was, the very first outside in, and they were always debating and stuff. And this was, again, with the first generation endoscopes. You didn't have the visualized burrs. And, this, I remember, Gun Choi in his book, he's like, people ask him, hey, do you do inside out? Do you do outside in? He's like, I don't even know what you guys are talking about. You just go and take care of the pathology. It's the half and half or targeted approach. Wherever the pathology is, that's where you start and that's where you go. But everyone had something to debate about. And now the modern day approach is more of an outside in, where you dock at the base of the SAP and Wagner's arch, and then visually gain access with your visualized reamers and burrs and stuff. And that's because the technology allows that. Okay, so now more recent day, dual portal or biportal endoscopy is coming. This decouples the camera and the instruments, a little bit more flexibility for bony work, faster bony work. This has gotten rapid adoption. Even a lot of the traditional MIS surgeons are adopting this. It's more natural, I guess, and more familiar, so it's a little bit quicker adoption. But it does cause a lot more kind of subcutaneous tissue disruption, than just a uniportal. And so, I think of it as similar to like a tubular type surgery, but visualization's good. Okay, so barriers for adoption in the US. Sorry if I'm going a little long here, but I think, there was endoscopic surgery is trying to replace a really successful surgery, microdiscectomy. That's probably some people's most successful, best, easiest surgery. Reimbursement issues were also a problem. They used to have endoscopically assisted in the 63030 code, but I think with the spine societies trying to protect that code from overutilization with pain doctors and stuff, they took it out of that code. And then in 2017, there was a push for their own endoscopic code, and so that got approved. Unfortunately, there's not just one endoscopy, it's a platform technology now. And so, it doesn't describe everything that we do. So it's kind of outdated, and unfortunately at that time, people did not do enough, so they couldn't assign RVUs. And so, it's just led to even more confusion now. Again, there's more money in fusion, so there wasn't a huge interest in the big spine companies. But now there's Arthrex coming in, so that's kind of like the first major company. So we'll see what the future holds. And then again, we kind of touched on the lack of academic training. So you'd have to do this post-training, and with private practice guys. So there's limited training costs, long learning curve. Again, 2D versus 3D visualization made it difficult. And at the time, there were also a lot of confounding percutaneous procedures, where like the skeptics and the academic guys, lumped all these other technologies in with endoscopic spine surgery. There were all these percutaneous blind procedures like APLD, automated percutaneous lumbar discectomy. It was just a nucleotome blindly to indirectly decompress the disc. I think they still sell it. This was kind of proven not to be that successful in randomized control studies, and people use this against arthroscopic microdiscectomy is what Camden called it. There were like the decompressor system, a mechanical auger, hydrocision, hydrodiscectomy, all these tools to blindly remove discs percutaneously. And then ArthroCare had their nucleoplasty coblation technology, and just indirectly decompressing the disc. And Claris had this thing, laser-assisted spine endoscopy, where it's a laser you put in there, and they actually had a little endoscope in it, or image fiber. So that really muddied the water. Is that really endoscopic spine surgery? You're just putting a laser fiber in there. So you also had the IDET procedure, and there was a lot of confusion, and persists to this day. Percutaneous versus endoscopic investigational. I mean, we all see that. So again, academic guys really brought this to a head and training a lot of people, founding the Endoscopic Spine Surgery Research Group. I know Mike Wang said, it was a big eye-opening event when he saw the 900 users in China just there for endoscopic training. And he's like, if they're doing it outside the world, in other parts of the world, we should bring it to the US. A lot of interest in endoscopic spine surgery. About half of the publications within the last 5 years. And so final thoughts, it's a very high interest level, big growth phase right now. Technology has advanced significantly. It's a platform technology, got a lot of training options, and thanks to these guys, a lot of guys in this room brought it to the residents and fellows. But we still need to solve the coding and reimbursement issues, and where will we take this in the future for all of you young guys? Maybe 2024 is a good time to, start this. We want you to join the field. So thank you, and bring Dr. Anthony Yeung up and to answer questions, because he was in the room. Sorry if that was a little bit long. I'm just the messenger here. So yeah, anybody have any good questions for Anthony that he can answer on the internet?
First of all, thank you for summarizing that, and Tony, thank you for everything you've done for the field. So nobody would be here without all the hard work that you put in and all the arrows that you took, right? We saw the pictures, so thanks for pulling them out before the meeting too. I have a question for you. When we work with the endoscope, it is so hard to get the ergonomics right to work down there, and I wanted to hear your thoughts and your memories, how you designed the radio frequency probe with that curvature, and how you designed that and made that work, because it seems to be such a concept that, how did you come up with that?
It was an idea, and I was fortunate when I decided to put my money where my mouth was, and I opened the first endoscopic spine center in Arizona, and I had no partners, just me. So if I had that, I didn't have to work with the rules of the hospital. But I bought a chest, and when I did workshops, I would keep the cadavers, and I could use it like 4 or 5 times before it started smelling. And then the other thing was the anatomy. People ask me, how do you know what you're looking at? I said, you know what? When I go to the airport to pick up my mother, I know it's my mother, but everybody doesn't know. They think it's an Asian lady. They don't even know it's my mother. So that was my answer. They had no answer to that.
Because you see it all the time.
Right. But I can say this, having attended this meeting, all you guys are much more informed and much more academic, and you know, you do teaching better than I do. I was in private practice, and I didn't want to teach because I said, yeah, you're too slow. Just do that 10 times faster. So then I put Chris under pressure for that. So it was basic learning the regular anatomy, knowing that there are anomalous anatomy, and you had to be able to see it, and then finally practicing after someone visited me for more than a week. On the weekends, I would defrost my cadavers and let them work on that on their own after watching it live. And I would interview my patient the next day, and they say, I didn't feel a thing. What'd you do? It's magic. So I developed a following, and overall, in the end, I had done 11,000 surgeries. It'll be a while before anybody catches up. But I was under no constraints with the government, with payers, and I had a good contract with Blue Cross Blue Shield, which I gave them 25% discount, and I said, if I don't get them better, you don't have to pay. So my complication rate was about 3.5%, and then now it's less than 1%. Nice. So that's just the academic side. You guys are smarter than I am. You're much better at teaching than I am. You're much better at lecturing. But the other things, I'm dying to tell you about this, the history of how I got involved in it involves Chris, okay? Mm-hmm. So unless you ask, I'm not going to say anything.
Actually, we have to. First of all, we want to applaud both of you guys for first having such a tremendous impact on the field, and we talk about how everything we do is built on everything we're able to see is based on the shoulders of giants, and you truly are a giant in the field, and we want to again give another a round of applause for you because I think you deserve it. I think you deserve it. But I do want to know the story. I do want to know the story. Story now.
Okay.
How Chris was involved
Chris
in this.
I shouldn't tell him this. Chris was 5 years old when I came back. Let's see, was it? Yeah, no. I was going to be drafted to go to Vietnam in 1971. And then I was told, if you get an orthopedic residency, we'll defer you until the end. So the end was 1975, war was over. So I was trained in pediatric orthopedics, cerebral palsy, spinal deformity with scoliosis. So I was the first one to do endoscopic or do surgery. I did open in the Philippines, and I traveled for little bit more than 2 years, and I decided to come back and start private practice. Now, Chris, my boss, was the heir to Johnson & Johnson, and he says, we're looking for a Band-Aid boy. And I said, Chris, he's perfect for it. And his wife wanted it. And Chris says, I'm not going to sit in a tub naked. So he refused. So that's the story. So these are funny stories that I can tell. But academically and how to develop the system, the thing that I'm proud of is that the academic and the private practice doctors work together, and they're just as informed. But a lot of the academic guys go into private practice because they can make more money. Because if you're like LeBron James and Michael Jordan, you can ask what you want. And if you're recognized by the insurance company, they'll pay you whatever you want in order to do it. I learned that from Jian Shen because I met him. And he's from communist China, but he came after the Cultural Revolution. I escaped in 1949, just before then. So I was lucky. Timing is very lucky.
I do have a question about the development of the endoscope. I know that as you were in the room with Camben and all these these guys who were setting the foundation. What about what Camben was doing made you think, no, I have something different? Because I know you obviously had you worked with Camben in 1991, and you developed the scope in 1997. Can you just walk us through quickly what was your mindset during that time?
Well, Camben wanted to develop a operating scope. So his concept was make an oval scope, so you have a scope on top of a scope. I said, no, just cut it, the bevel, okay? And I saw that if you had an operating scope with this guy named Grockmal, I don't even know who he is. He's a GYN doctor, but if I could plot the G spot, I would be really rich. but that's how it evolved. And then I had a round tube, 6 millimeters, and I could rotate it, isolate the traversing exiting nerve. So it's all about anatomy, but anatomy is not exact. None of us are created same, so you have to recognize what's normal and what's not normal. And how do you do that? With a scope. And you start with a small scope, and if you need a larger scope, then that's what you're doing. All these companies are working together. The other thing that was lucky was that because I had started early, I would go to the vendors and I say, I like this instrument. Oh, here, Dr. Yeung, you can use it. Maybe we can sell more. So I got all my equipment for free from every vendor out there. So I had to use it. I'm Chinese. I know how to make money.
You have any more questions?
He's here all week. Now,
Question?
Thank you.
When you were developing these techniques, the approaches, the technology, how did you talk to patients about this approach at that time? And then as you furthered the field and developed new techniques, how did you then bring those up to patients, and how did they perceive that? Were they receptive? Was there a lot of pushback?
Well, here's what I'll say. Nothing is really original. Even the guys, Gun Choi learned from Sang Ho Lee, they learned from me, and the students, that ones that Han Choi Loy, they learned from their teacher. But the teacher taught them, but they published, so they become recognized in the literature. But there's a lot of innovative thinkers out there. Look at Aristotle and all the ancient Greeks, Western civilization. They have democracy, but they're not the #1 country. So there's a problem with democracy. You have to know how to control it. And the main thing is that you have an idea. If you think it's going to work, I tried it. And the way I convinced my patients, I said, you don't get better, you don't have to pay. So in the beginning, I paid back 3.5%. Now it's less than 1%. So you have to put your money where your mouth is.
We are running a little bit short on time. Are there any burning questions for Dr. Yeung? I think he's going to be here all day, so we can ask any more questions later on today. But again, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Dr. Yeung. We appreciate you all.